Muslims in the UK, of which I am one myself, because it is being reported in the Times today that Muslims are scared to live in the UK after the riots. This says that Britain is facing a brain drain of middle-class Muslims who no longer feel safe due to rising Islamophobia. An advisor to the king has warned. This is Harris Bokhari, who has advised the royal family and government on race relations, said that recent rioting had fueled concerns amongst the Muslim community that the UK was no longer a welcoming place for people from different cultures. He also revealed that he had discussed leaving the UK with his family, despite being somebody who loves this country beyond anything, his words. And he said this: the way I view it now is that we have a brain drain. And I quote, "So from the Muslim community, we have got really talented people who have left the country and more are thinking about leaving the country." Bokhari said that we were afraid to leave their homes after the mosques were attacked. He also said Muslims will rebuild. They're trying to rebuild the Southport mosque after it was attacked by far-right protesters. And Tell Mama, the charity which tracks anti-Muslim hate, had said that it has received 500 reports of online and offline hate, including death threats aimed at Muslim women and targeted attacks and vandalism to businesses, mosques and Islamic centres across the UK. And Bokhari goes on to say, add all this up, what does it mean? If you're Muslim in this country, you can't say this is a welcoming place anymore. And it's interesting because the founder of Tell Mama, Fayaz Mughal, who I know extremely well, has said this: I've always stood by Britain and stood by the values. In fact, I've challenged Islamist extremism and stood for British Muslim communities. But after this recent round, I just thought, when the hell are we going to get over this racism? And my mindset is, I've had enough. I want to go to Europe. This is Fayaz Mughal, the founder of Tell Mama, which tracks Islamophobic incidents. Hamza Yusuf, the former Scottish minister, also said that he and his family were questioning whether they should stay, while Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, has said that for the first time ever, his daughters were scared because of the colour of their skin. He added, I'm going nowhere. Now, I think that this is a really important issue to unpack on several levels, and I've talked about these issues many, many times on programmes, been roundly, in some cases, vilified for it, but I just think this is too important to pussyfoot around and engage in political correctness on. So what I'm looking for here is a measured, calm, sensible, rational, but deep debate around this question. How did we get to the point where Muslims are scared to live in the UK? How do we get to the point when Muslims are scared to live in the UK? 0345 6060 973, text 84850, ask Alexa to send a comment to LBC. I will give you my thoughts on this, of which I have many, as you might expect, in a few moments. But joining me first is Ajmal Masroor, Imam and broadcaster based in London, who I've engaged with on such matters before and who's always very measured in his views. Ajmal, very good to have you on the programme. Assalamu alaikum to you. When you hear from Harris Bokhari that Britain is facing a brain drain of middle-class Muslims who no longer feel safe in this country, are you surprised?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, Ali, for the kind greetings as well as welcoming me to your program. Though the program is very depressing and sad, and it brings the worst of Britain, unfortunately, I think we have started on a good note. We have greeted each other with peace and happiness, and that's something that we need to talk about more often. When we Muslims meet each other, or when we meet anybody, we are obliged to say, peace be upon you. And this greeting is a very disarming greeting. We have every intention in our hearts and our minds and at the core of our faith to live peacefully, to find peace internally and externally, and to be in peace with our neighbors and the world around. And that is Islam. And one of the reasons why I believe there is a misunderstanding, there is mistrust, and there is distrust in our community about the Muslims is because vast majority of our people in the UK, Muslims, as well as many non-Muslims, have very little idea about the truth of Islam. The fact that Islam is about being good to God, being good to oneself, and being good to your neighbors is the essence of our faith, is not understood by people. And that's not talked about more often. What we're talking about often, and what we hear being reported on the media, are the global crisis that is not inspired by Muslims or Islam, is more geopolitics, inspired by political interest, greed, wealth, desire for power, corruption, and in some cases, our unethical foreign policies. If we could untangle all of that, separate them, and focus on the Muslim community's contribution to Britain and the world at large, we would be seeing this is a brilliant community to have and a community to be relished about. And we should celebrate the fact that Muslims are here and have made a contribution to this country for well over 200 years.
Which I agree with, Ajmal, but there are issues as well, aren't there? And do you feel that despite all the positive things that Muslims do in this country, and the majority of them are trying to go about their business, trying to earn a living, paying taxes, abiding by the laws and regulations of this country and feel very proudly British, do you not also agree that there are some really quite profound issues that Muslims in this country as a collective community, and I don't say this as one monolithic bloc, but just Muslims in generally, have to accept that there are real challenges within their community, particularly with extremism and also terrorist attacks that have occurred in recent years?
And I've answered that already, Ali, but let's just revisit that. Those terrorists who did the terror activities or attacks on our country in America, in other parts of Europe, what did they say when they carried out their activities or when they carried out their attacks? They simply said, we're retaliating for your unethical foreign policies. If you do not understand your unethical foreign policies have consequences and have left Muslim societies in majority Muslim countries in tatters. Obviously, that's their motto and that's their motive. And we're not saying that's justifiable. That's what these guys have said. And our governments haven't changed any of our foreign policies. Look at the Palestine-Israel conflict. 100 years on, or if you want to say 75 years on, hasn't been resolved and nobody is interested in resolving it. Look at Syria. Look at Yemen. We're still supplying Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and many of the dictators in the North African countries with arms. We are breaking every ethics and law, international law, in supplying Israel arms that we should not be supplying. Now, these are the problems when it comes to the issues of extremism in our country. Nothing to do with Islam. Islam did not inspire it. Muslims did not cause it. It's caused by our government's unethical foreign policies. And I know a lot of people don't like this, but I'm going to be louder than loud. It is our unethical, rotten foreign policies. Let's come back to Muslims. Every society, Muslims, Christians, Jews, or any people of other faith or no faith, everybody will have their own rotten apples. But that's not a collective reflection of a community. It's just rotten apples. We deal with them as rotten apples. But tell me, Ali, show me a Muslim country in the Muslim world today that is free enough to have its own democratic election, that is free enough to run its own affairs without our meddling it, that is free enough to have its own people ruling it. Take the example of Bangladesh, where I come from, my parents come from. It has been ruled by Hasina's government, our Milik government, for 15 years, and we have supported it. And I have been one of those who have been banned from traveling back to Bangladesh because I criticized human rights abuse of Hasina. And when I brought this to the attention of the Foreign Office said to us, oh, Hasina is our friend. We can't be talking against our friend. And this friend has killed, disappeared, killed people mercilessly and massacred students recently. And I can name you one country after another, Pakistan. We have seen what's happened in Afghanistan. So I am for peaceful living of people. I believe Muslims have the capacity to live, and 99% of them do. The 1% who do go extreme, they go extreme because of our rotten foreign policies. And when will we change that?
Yeah, I understand the point about foreign policy, Ajmal, but a lot of people disagree with aspects of foreign policy, including myself. But normally they go on a march or write a letter to their MP. They don't engage in terrorist attacks. I mean, the problem is that this is a very seductive argument that is made by my fellow Muslims, which is there are a few rotten errant apples, and let's just put it at that. And these people who engage in these acts of terrorism are not Muslim. The problem with that is, Ajmal, and this is where I struggle, is that these very same individuals go and perpetrate their acts of violence in the name of their religion, and it gives all ordinary, law-abiding, patriotic Muslims in this country a bad name. Now, I want to ask you this. Carl Bildt, back in the mid-2000s at the Adlon Hotel in Berlin at a dinner which I was at, post 9/11, had said that there should be a battle for the soul of Islam, a bit like a reformation in Christianity. Do you think that Muslims, ordinary folk around the country, need to get involved in this metaphorical battle to root out the errant elements within their own faith that are abusing it and engaging in acts of violence?
A very simple answer to it. Islam already has it, Ali. It's in the Quran. Quran does not condone, does not accept, does not celebrate, does not promote violence, acts of brazen terrorism, or acts of mindless attack and murder and mayhem. It doesn't. It calls it, if you kill one life, take one life, it is like you've taken the lives of the entire humanity. It's categorical. So Islam deals with it. There are Muslims who don't abide by their faith, just like many Muslims who don't abide by their faith when it comes to drinking. They drink. Many Muslims gamble. They gamble. There are Muslims who go and do acts of terror in the name of their faith, just like EDL has done it in the name of Britain and British flag. That is not the fault of Britain, nor is it the fault of Islam. The other point that you raised earlier on, which I don't think we should discount. I'll give you an example. When the Palestinians want free country, when they want to live freely in their own country, they have been seeking their freedom. Remember, their country was taken from them. It was stolen from them by activities and aggressive policies of the Israeli government over the last 75 years. Now, Palestine and Palestinians have been resisting peacefully. Nothing has happened. They resist with arms. Nothing happens. Whether you do it peacefully, politically, nothing happens, because the truth is, we marched across the world and the country in our millions when Iraq war happened. Tony Blair ignored it. Millions have been marching about the Palestinian people and their right to have a life and a country. Our British government has ignored it. The example of Pakistan. Pakistani people have been marching for a free country. Yeah. No, their own elected government has been thrown out. Take the example of Bangladesh. 15 years, people have been marching peacefully. But hold on. Government has been using weapons that we supply to destroy any peaceful march. So what the students did was they came out into the street and they did not go home until the government was overthrown.
But they don't have to come on the streets of Tower Hamlets, Ajmal. I mean, this is the problem, right?
I didn't say that.
But they do, Ajmal. You see,
hold on. In the UK, we have a problem, and that is our government says one thing but does something very different.
Okay.
It talks about peace and justice around the world, but it actually doesn't do it.
I understand. But Ajmal, let me ask you this. Do you think genuinely, and I think about these things deeply as a British Muslim myself, do you think Muslims have a PR problem? And I'll give you an example. So this guy, Mohsin Ali, right, he was just elected as a councillor in Leeds, right? And he was wearing the keffir. He was talking about being elected on the back of Gaza. He was a Green councillor, gave this pretty punchy speech at the count in a local hall, wherever it was, and ended his tirade by saying the words Allahu Akbar. Now, Ajmal, he wasn't in a mosque. A lot of people associate those words wrongly with terrorist attacks, but they do. And if you're living in a Western society in that kind of context, would it not just be simple PR to not come out with stuff like that, honestly?
But why? Again, the issue here is this is one individual out of
He's an elected official.
Yeah, hang on a second. Even if it's an elected official, Nigel Farage will get elected very soon after inciting all these violent attacks on our streets. Are we doing anything about Nigel Farage? No, we are not. You know why? Because there is inconsistency in our philosophy. I'll tell you one thing. There is nobody with sanity in their head, nobody with a little bit of knowledge about Islam, who would associate anything with Allahu Akbar except it is called for submission. It's called for prayer. It's called for surrender to God and peaceful lifestyle. Muslims say Allahu Akbar when they're surprised. Muslims say Allahu Akbar when they're happy. Muslims say Allahu Akbar when they lose something.
That is true.
Muslims say Allahu Akbar. Muslims say Allahu Akbar when they go to a wedding. Now, if some people have an allergic reaction to Allahu Akbar, look, I'm really sorry that they do. I would love to educate them and say to people, don't get an allergic reaction to it. It's a great statement of God's greatness. But the more important thing is, how many times do I say Salamu Alaikum to everybody around me? Why is it that people don't understand? It is the same phrase, Salamu Alaikum, peace be on you. I'm surrendering to a peaceful lifestyle. So in Britain, for me, why has it become unsafe? It's because there are conversations like the one that we're having is being had in TV stations and radio stations without unpacking, I know you do, without unpacking the nuanced part of it. So, for example, what is the faith really? What is the true nature of Muslims really? Yeah. Look at the global Muslim community and see their phenomenal contribution. You know, we won't be sitting in Europe today if it wasn't for Muslim contribution to Renaissance and development of civilization.
Understood. Ajmal, I think there's a lot to unpack there, and I'm grateful, as always, for our discussions. You're always very passionate, but also very sensible in your approach. Ajmal Masroor there, Imam and broadcaster based in London, joining me there. Let me just give you you my views. Look, I have a lot of respect for Ajmal, but I do think he's being a little bit benign on this, a little bit simplistic. I understand the point he makes. Look, ordinary Muslims are not nutters who go around committing terrorist attacks. Okay, I get that fully. But you see, the problem is that I think it's too easy for ordinary Muslims like myself to bury our heads in the sand and say, look, 9/11 was a Mossad plot, which lots of Muslims do, by the way. In the privacy of their own homes, they'll tell you this, particularly around North London dinner tables with highly educated students who have been to red brick universities. This is not just the downtrodden who are coming out with this utter nonsense. So I do think that in certain parts of the Muslim communities around this country, there is an issue of denial. And I don't think that we can address problems unless we're actually open and honest about some of the issues within our own communities. Now, that includes people with some very extreme, absolutely errant views that need to be called out and challenged. Now, challenging that takes guts, it takes gumption, and it takes personal risk if you're going to actually do it. It's not fun. And this has been going on for years. As I've said before, the first introduction people in this country had to Islam in many cases, was the burning of books, Salman Rushdie's book, in the late 1980s. Then they had to contend with more extreme commentary outside mosques from Abu Hamza and Omar Bakri Muhammad. Then they had to deal with terrorist attacks. Then they had to deal with grooming gangs and all of these things. And no one is saying for a second that ordinary Muslims have got any truck with this. But the problem is, if you continue to bury your head in the sand and say nothing to do with us, gov, it doesn't help. And I do think that a elected official shouting Allahu Akbar in a thing, maybe fine, he can do that if he wants to. I'm not saying you can't say what you want. The question is, should you, in the context of people feeling very nervous about that in that context? I wouldn't have done that. But that's just me. So, a lot to unpick here. How do we get to the point where Muslims are scared to live in the UK? I'm not surprised we got to this point. I've been predicting we'd get to this point for 30 years. I'm just worried about where we're going to get in the next 30.